Hello and welcome to another of my videos on fretworking and scroll sawing as it's more commonly known. In this video I'm going to talk about the Anto-Fret method of fretworking. Now if you've never heard of Anto-Fret, there's probably a good reason for that. It's more commonly known in the UK and other countries as bevel cutting. But the name Anto-Fret originally comes from the Hobbies company. Now back in 1911 they announced a new fretworking system which they called Anto-Fret. It was originally developed by an Italian priest called Monsignor Antoni. I'm not sure if that's the right pronunciation, but that's what it looks like to me, the wording. The idea of the design was that you cut on a bevel, and it allowed to give a sort of simulated carving effect, which I'm going to show you on my saw in a moment. Each design sheet came with a little printed license on it, and the idea was you were supposed to cut the little license out and stick it on the back of your piece of fretwork that you'd made, and it said on the license that you're only allowed to sell one item from this particular pattern, and if you sold more than one then you infringed their copyright, so presumably you had to buy as many patterns as you required for the items to make. You had to glue the pattern onto the workpiece and then sandpaper it off when you'd finished it, so the pattern was gone anyway. Anyway, getting back to Anto-Fret, what it involves is cutting the work on a very slight bevel to enable the work to protrude through the workpiece and give a carving effect, which I'm going to show you in a moment or two. Now here's a simple example of Anto-Fret or bevel cutting, where you can see I've cut a simple floral pattern here. It's probably a little leaf, or it might be part of a flower, that doesn't matter, and a seagull. Now in the first instant, if I press on the seagull that way, you'll notice it protrudes through the work, and if you sandpaper carefully around this, it does give quite a nice carved effect. On the other hand, with the flower or leaf, if you press it, I've cut this one in the opposite direction, so to speak, and you can see it's inset into the wood, which gives a similar carved effect. Now if I turn it round, you'll notice that it's quite the opposite. Now you've got the leaf which is sticking out in relief, which again I've sandpapered around the corners to give the card effect, and on the seagull it's inset. Using this method you can get some quite attractive patterns which do give a sort of a carved effect to your work. But it is quite difficult to do, but I'm going to show you now how to do it. Now to do bevel cutting, what you've got to do is to angle this table slightly in one direction or another so that the blade doesn't cut at a true vertical. Now it is quite critical. If you don't angle it enough, the timber will just push straight through, and I've got a little example I've done here to show you. In this example at the bottom, I had the blade set at approximately 5 degrees off vertical, and if I press that in, you'll see that it does give the effect we require, and the piece protrudes from the back about the right amount. Well, it depends on what you want and how much you want it sticking through or not. In the case of this one in the middle, if I press this one, it goes straight through, and the reason is that for that one I didn't have a big enough bevel, a big enough degree of angle set. So I've sort of explained the principles. The next thing I'm going to do is to show you how to set the saw up to do bevel cutting. Well, this is my Hegner fret saw, or scroll saw if you want to call it a scroll saw. I always call it a fret saw because that's what they always used to be called. I've had this machine for over 20 years now, and it still performs as well today as it did 20 years ago when it was brand new. It's a wonderful machine. It's really smooth. I'm just going to turn it on and show you how smooth it really is. Now we're underneath the saw. I hope you can see this. It's probably not going to be very clear because it's underneath the table and I can't get the light into it. But you'll notice this long handle here with this Bakelite knob on the end. All you do to adjust the level, if you look inside, there's a little scale here. It's on 0 at the moment, which means the table should be vertical with the blade. Now when you're setting it to vertical, it's best to use a small set square to make sure you do get it absolutely square. But for our purposes, we're going to angle the blade about 5 degrees. So all you do is just undo this little knob here and just move the table around, and I'm going to get it about 5 degrees, which I think is about enough. As you can see, it's not a great deal of angle, but it is sufficient for what we want. Tighten that up. And don't forget, by the way, when you've done this, make sure you put the table back after you've finished, otherwise your work will be a bit funny. Now the first thing you've got to do is to drill a tiny hole in the workpiece to get the blade through. Now the smaller the hole the better. If you have too large a hole it will show up obviously, so the smaller you can have the hole the better it is to do the job. Now in the early days you would use one of these. This is an actual genuine Hobbies drill. This one dates back over 100 years. It was once my grandfather's, then my dad's, and now it's mine. Obviously I don't use it now. You can imagine it's quite difficult. That's got a fairly small bit, but even that isn't really small enough for what we want. But I just thought I'd show you that nice old tool anyway. Now the method I use is to use a little thing called what they call a pin chuck, like this, which is ideal because when you're working with a tiny drill like this and your electric drill, it's a bit awkward putting a tiny drill in a great big chuck. So these little things are called pin chucks, and you'll notice I've got two here. This one's got a very, very tiny bit in, and although it's better if you use it, I'm not going to bother with it this time because it is very small. I'm going to use this one. Now if you haven't got a pin chuck, obviously you can use an electric drill, or another way to do it is to get a little piece of dowel. This is one I made up many years ago before I had any pin chucks, and all you do, this has got a tiny bit in that end and a tiny bit in that end, and you can just do it by hand, just by this method. Just by twirling it round you can actually drill a hole, especially as long as it's not too thick, the wood. I should mention that when you're doing bevel cutting you need the wood to be reasonably thick, otherwise the thing won't work, will it? So I'm just going to pop the pin chuck in the drill here, tighten it up, and then I'll just drill a simple hole in here in the line. That's all you need. Okay, so everything's set up, the saw's set at the right angle, and we've got the piece here with the hole drilled through, so what remains now is to put the saw blade through the hole and cut this little shape out, and we'll see if it works or not. One thing to remember is when you're doing this bevel cutting you must always cut in the same direction. So if I'm cutting around this way I must continue. I can't back off and go the other way like you normally do in fretwork. So always cut in the same direction, otherwise it'll muck the whole thing up. Right, I'm just going to release the tension, take the blade out, and I'm just going to pop the blade through this little hole, and I can attach it to the machine at the top to the clamp. That's the blade attached there, and I put the tension back on, so we're all ready to roll now. One little tip, if it's a bit tricky to get the blade through the hole because it's so small, just take the blade right out, pop the blade through the wood, and then insert the blade back in like that with the wood already on it. It's easy to do. Now I'm just going to cut around here, and you can see what it's like. I'll turn the speed down a little bit. Now one advantage of having a variable speed machine is when you're doing very delicate cutting you can slow it down, because if you've got the machine whirring away at a fair old rate of knots like that, it does make it quite difficult on thin timber to control the saw, especially if you're a beginner. So if you turn the speed down you can actually get the Hegner down at the speed you would use an actual hand saw, look, and it still works. And notice how quiet running it is, because it's got an induction motor. So that's another thing as an advantage of a Hegner, is the induction motor. I'm just going to turn it up to a comfortable speed, and I'm just going to cut round this line. As I say, this isn't precision work, I'm just doing it to demonstrate the principles, so don't expect too much. I'll speed it up a little bit, otherwise we'll take all day, won't we? Make sure I don't cut the cat's ear off. See, now here's the point in question. I'm just going to stop the saw a moment to explain. Now normally if you're cutting that cat's ear, a normal thing, you would go up into the corner, if you were cutting him out to get rid of him, like, there's a cutout, and then you would approach it from the other end like that and cut into the corner so you get a good sharp corner. But you can't do it when you're doing bevel cutting. I've got to go in the corner and spin the wood around. I just thought I'd mention that. In the corner. When you get to the corner, spin him around like that, look. And back to the starting point. There we go. Now before you say it, I know I didn't cut exactly on the line, but I didn't want to. I was just doing it roughly. So we're going to take it out and see how we've got on. Pop that out there. There we go. Now then. So there's the finished thing. The cat's cut out, and if I press him like that, he should go through. And there you are, look. That's the principles of Anto-Fret, or as it's more commonly known, bevel cutting. If you turn it round, you can see the effect on the other side, where it sticks out of the wood. I have actually rounded the corners off a bit just to make it effective. So you can see it does look almost like a carved item. And there it is. Anto-Fret, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. There is a decent website called ukworkshop.co.uk. It is a general woodworking website, and it has sections on all aspects of woodworking, and they've even got a special scroll saw section. It's a forum, but it's really good because there are a lot of very helpful and decent people who post on there. And if you've got any questions to ask about scroll sawing or fretwork, there are plenty of people on there who'll be only too happy to help you. I'm on there myself under the name of Scrimper. It's well worth a visit, so you know, consider having a look at that. I will put a link on the end of my video in the description. I'll put that back. So that's all for now, folks. Bye.